This is a lecture from OpenTuition.
Hello, I'm going to be talking through the question SWIFT, one of the questions released by the ACCA as representative of what they'll test in the real exam. This in the exam it was set was the second of the three long questions, where particularly a question focusing around controls. As always, I'll very quickly flick through to see what's there. Requirement A looks like a knowledge-based question, which, if you're well prepared, you've probably seen about 20 times before. Methods of documenting internal controls and advantages or disadvantages. So that's a knowledge-based question. In fact, this one is just asking for advantages. And then secondly, here's the big marks, isn't it? 7 key controls. 7 key controls. And with those 7 key controls, I need to do two things. I need to identify them, then have a cup of tea. Well, I don't really stop for a cup of tea. Identify them and explain them. And then finally, in the second part, describe tests of control. There we are, and we just want 7. So there's my requirements. To do the second requirement, I would need to know the scenario and work through the scenario. I certainly don't need the scenario for the first requirement, so I would be looking at the first requirement first. So when the auditor ascertains the controls at the start, then they need to identify them and in some way document them before they walk through the system to make sure they've documented them properly. These are 3 methods that are sometimes used. So we're just giving some notes here to explain what these methods actually are. This is not coming out of the scenario. It's hopefully coming out of your head, but it's probably one of the easier bits where to some extent, even if you haven't rote learned, you should be able to get something out of this. 6 marks, so you can see 6 white, 6 blank boxes ready for the 6 marks. So we just need to think about what these things mean. Narrative notes are, of course, what you can see all over this question. So they are a description of the system using words or in writing. So a written description of the system. And if you look on the left, when you're looking at the question, that's like narrative notes, isn't it? In the sense they're using subheadings and doing things stage by stage. So again, it will be separated out into the different systems. So that written description will be split up into the stages of the relevant cycle. If you took purchases, the cycle, as you know, would be order, then receipt of goods, then invoice, then record, then pay. So the notes will be split up that way. Big advantage, of course, for those are that they are actually easy to record because it's quite easy just to write things down. You don't need specialist flowcharting skills. So easy to record. And also junior staff, younger staff in the audit team, or certainly the junior staff, don't need specialist training to interpret. So we could also say they are relatively easy anyway to interpret for junior audit staff. I remember when I started in audit, I could understand the notes, but when I looked at a flowchart, I felt I was looking at something in a different language. Flowcharts are what flowcharts are. We know what they are, aren't we? It's where you actually represent a particular cycle in a diagram. So a particular cycle like purchase or payroll is represented pictorially in a diagram or in diagram form. And one of the things particularly about it is they'll use columns for each stage of the cycle. So you have the order on the left, the dispatch on the middle, the invoice on the right, and so on. So the columns, again, are used to represent the stages of the cycle. The problem is they're harder to prepare unless the staff are trained. So the audit staff may not be able to prepare or interpret unless properly trained. Oh, that's a disadvantage, isn't it? I've done the one thing I mustn't do. That's a very silly point, so I'm going to cancel that point, as you must in the exam straight away. We want an advantage, don't we? Well, the advantage is they can see the system visually. So, again, so it is easy, or it's easier for audit staff, that's better, to visualize the system. I nearly did what we all do, don't we? And that's answer a different question that we wanted to be asked. Silly boy. There we are. Easier for the audit staff to visualize the system. Sometimes they say that with flowcharting you can also spot missing controls. Questionnaires, the last one down there. I've always thought these were strange documents. Someone very clever in the audit basement invents a complete list of all controls that could be in place in any business in the world. And then the audit junior goes along and asks the finance director, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have the other? To the extent that it's almost likely that the finance director will want to hit the audit staff eventually after they've been asked 5,000 yes-no questions. So, sometimes known as ICQs, internal control questionnaires, list all possible controls. And then the point is that at an interview, client staff indicate which controls they have in place. Again, an advantage is you don't need much training to read out a list of questions. So actually it's fairly easy for junior staff to just list the questions out. So I'll just say little specialist training, in other words, not much is needed to complete or to interview the client. They don't need very much training. They just read the questions out in a kind of brainless way sometimes. It certainly would help to identify missing controls. So if you take something like, do you have a burglar alarm? No, therefore there is a missing control. I know that may not be relevant to the financial statements, but I can say missing controls are easily or more easily identified. So what do? You type for the time allowed, don't you? So don't go over your mark allocation as always, but I've just tried to explain what the positives are. So I've dealt with the first part of the question. The next part will require us to read the scenario quite carefully. Before we do that, I just want to talk about this word key control. If you're doing this exam after September 2021, there's a new language for key control. It will be referred to as a direct control. Let me just highlight that if I'm able to. So they'll call it a direct control. Doesn't make a massive difference as long as you recognise the term. I don't think it wants to highlight that, but never mind. Just see if it will do it for me. No, it's not going to highlight it. Direct controls, like key controls, are the controls that are there that will prevent, detect, or correct misstatements in the accounts. So whether they're called key or direct, the key thing is you're looking for positives in the scenario, things that would prevent or detect errors in the accounts. We'd ask to explain them, in other words, how they would actually prevent those things, and then to come up with some tests of control. As I look down, pause the recording if you need to read the scenario. As I look down, I can see I'm looking for 7. Half the question is on payroll, half the question is on purchases. The key thing, therefore, isn't it, is that not to actually come up with 7 key controls on payroll, because there might not be 7. So if you're saying, well, I'll do 3 or 4 on each, that would be a sensible way to approach it. I'm interested that if you look at the paragraphs as well, there are 3 paragraphs under payroll, there are 4 paragraphs under purchases, and what do we want? 7 controls. So there are probably about 10 or so, but you could probably just pick 1 out of each paragraph if you saw it, and go for the ones where you're able to explain what the impact of that control is in detecting misstatement, and also where you're actually able to devise a test of control. If we can't devise a test of control, we've wasted the right-hand column, so we need to be a little bit careful about that. Let's have a look at some of the points that we've got. In the first paragraph, I've noticed that there is a separate Human Resources Department. There we are, we've got a separate Human Resources Department, and that is separate from the Payroll Department. So we have a Human Resources Department in place. I think my highlighting may not be working, but if that's the case, I'm sure it's not the end of the world. But you can see the reference there to that Human Resources Department. That's better. So the key control is that they have an HR department which is separate from the payroll department. Now, the role of payroll is to process things on a regular basis every month. The role of HR is to actually deal with joiners, leavers and fixing the pay rates. This comes out late in the scenario, but on the payroll cycle there is very sensitive data like employee bank details and pay rates on a master file, sometimes known as standing data, and you don't want just anyone interfering with that. It needs to be done by more senior staff. So having the HR effectively again will be a very, very good control you're going to commit a payroll fraud, you don't book 2 hours extra overtime, you book 7 noughts on the end of your pay rate and then run away to another country. So how do I explain it? Do I explain this by saying this is segregation of duties? Well, I don't think that's good enough on its own. You need to take it further and just give an example. So I wouldn't say this is segregation of duties, but you could say this segregation of duties will help to minimize, I'm going to go for the word errors on the payroll. I think the ACCA answer talks about fictitious employees, which is perfectly valid. I'm a bit nervous about fraud because I know that once a student writes fraud in the first point, they will then write fraud in every other point, and it just sounds like something from the fraud squad. Most of the time it's not fraud, it's just a mistake that someone puts the wrong pay rate in. Instead of paying someone $29 an hour, they pay them $92 an hour. So how do we test that control? Well, the key verbs for test of control are what? The key verbs, in my mind, are inspect, observe, and reperform. You can have inquire. That's quite weak, isn't it? Because they'll just go yes. But if you stick with inspect, observe, and reperform, things will be good. I can't really observe them. I can't reperform them by dressing up as the payroll department. So I'll have to inspect. So you can inspect the relevant job descriptions or the organisation chart to confirm that control is in place. I'm going to say inspect company organisation chart to confirm that there is separation of payroll and HR. Lovely. Let's move on down the scenario. They talk about each employee having a unique employee number and the fact that that will make sure that the payroll department can't put people on the staff, there we are, unless that employee number is on there. So you could use that as a control, and that's a strong control. Or also, they've got this other control here, which is the one I'm going to pick up. Every month, there is an exception report about changes to standing data. Changes to standing data will be in respect of things like pay rates or new staff joining or leaving. It's those kind of things. And the key thing about this is that this is actually reviewed by someone. So someone will notice if there have been changes to pay rates or the list of leavers, the list of joiners. So my control in the first place that is present, my key control is therefore that an exception report on changes to standing data is produced on a monthly basis. So what's the point of that? Again, that will help us to identify errors or possibly unauthorized amendments. So I'm going to say this control will help to identify unauthorized changes could just be errors as well, to standing data, and I might just put a little example again, e.g. incorrect pay rise or rises. The marking of this, on the left side, the control is half a mark, the implication is half a mark. On the right side, test of control is a mark. Good verbs for test of control: inspect, observe, and reperform. Well, we can't reperform inspecting this thing, but we could certainly inspect, couldn't we? So we could inspect some of these inspection reports. Do you want to inspect 12? Well, that's probably overkill, isn't it? So I'm going to say inspect sample of exception reports to confirm. Now, who signs this thing? Yeah, to confirm that they have been signed by the payroll manager as evidence of review. Lovely. Will the examiner criticise you for lack of imagination by using inspect several times? No. So it's fine. In the next section, what happens is that the system automatically calculates pay. Automatic calculation of pay is, of course, a good thing. But what is even better in this particular system is that then some of these calculations are reperformed, and then the sampled payslips are signed as evidence of review. What a marvellous business this is. You've got the automatic calculation of the pay with a random sample being checked just to make sure there are no errors. So we've noticed, who is it? The payroll supervisor. Payroll supervisor manually checks sample of payslips. What's the point this? Again, it will help to prevent errors. It would help to prevent any errors in the automated or the automatic payroll system. So again, this would help to detect errors in the automatic calculation of payroll. Well, can computers get things wrong? Well, I guess if the wrong instructions go in the first place, it happens, doesn't it? A very long time ago, if you ask your aunties and uncles, they'll talk about the year 2000 when they thought that all the computers, I think, would destroy themselves when 1999 went to 2000. As it happens, nothing happened. Anyway, what's the evidence? It's the pay slips, isn't it? So inspect sample of pay slips which were, it's a bit of a mouthful this, isn't it? Selected by the payroll manager and confirm signed as evidence of review. Just to confirm that's happened. I suspect as well that you would probably, on a monthly basis, you'd have to inquire, but you'd have to inquire with them that they did it every single month. You can't just go ferreting through all the pay slips, can you? So I think that might be too hard, but there we are. We've got some decent tests down. We'll go into the purchasing now. As always, pick things that are easy to talk about. So I can see that, excuse me, there is authorization of purchases. So up to 5,000 is authorized by a manager. Above 5,000 is authorized by a director. So that's a very sensible system. I can also see this word, multi-part. Now, having multi-part documents can assist in preventing errors. I sometimes think, though, if you've got the choice, I probably wouldn't go on about them too much, because if you then start off a very long sentence, where you're thinking that this would have 4 copies and this would go to Beryl, this would go to Brian, you end up with an answer that's completely unintelligible. So I would stay off of the multi-part business personally. But what we've noticed, isn't it, is that all purchase orders are authorized at an appropriate level. So all purchase orders are authorized at an appropriate level. Again, you can go down the fraud route, but I hate words like bogus purchases. I suppose you could say fictitious. It's perfectly all right. The key thing, isn't it, is that if you have got authorization, the company will not buy unnecessary goods. And if they bought unnecessary goods, they would then need to get written down in the financial statements. Or sometimes they buy stuff which is poor quality. Again, if it's inventory or something, would then have to be written down to scrap. So this would help to prevent the company making unnecessary or poor quality purchases. And you'll probably be devastated to know that I'm going to inspect them. Well, I can't think of anything else to do. Just make sure, of course, that we say a sample. So I'm going straight in on the other side and saying inspect sample of, be careful, what's the document? It's purchase orders, isn't it? To confirm authorized at the appropriate level. In the next paragraph, as always, look for something that looks quite easy to talk about. And I've noticed, again, that they raise a good receive note, which is good. They only do that once they've checked the quantity and quality of the goods. Now that sounds nice to talk about, doesn't it? So the GRN is only recognised, so they only book the goods in once they've checked quantity and quality. That has to be, I think, a good thing. Again, my highlighting is being a bit awkward, never mind. So I've noticed who does this. Warehouse team inspects goods for quality and quantity before the goods are accepted. What's the point of that? The point of it is, of course, that they will not accept goods of inferior quality or goods that have not been ordered. So this means that the company will not accept goods which have not been ordered or of poor quality. You could inspect again, but why not? We said inspect, observe, reperform. Let's show you an observe. So although it's not a great test of control, it is a test of control. You will literally stand like a wallflower in the warehouse and watch them doing it. Some would say, well, this only confirms that they're behaving when you're actually in there with them. That is true, but nevertheless, it is an accepted test of control. So you could mention that one, it's fine. So back over here, I'll put observe. Observe warehouse staff. You don't really have to disguise yourself as a tree. Observe warehouse staff. Again, accepting goods only after inspecting quantity, which they would agree back to the purchase order, and quality. When they actually accept the GRN, presumably they sign it in some way, so you could always say inspect sample of GRNs. If it doesn't mention signing, you can gamble on it just to confirm whether or not that the goods received note has been signed off as evidence of the review. That's a possibility as well. How many have we got so far? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's pick one more from this bit. Anywhere where it says that something is signed, like the clerk signs the batch control sheet, that's a good one to test, isn't it? Because again, you can inspect for signature. I'm going to pick the next paragraph though. They do supplier statement recs, and those supplier statement recs are reviewed by the financial controller. Now, if I say to my staff, do a supplier statement rec, they might not do it, so it's important that I review it. So, supplier statement reconciliations are performed and reviewed on a monthly basis. Again, they will pick up things like invoices that have been received for goods not received, payments where the supplier says they haven't had the money, double invoices. Again, so this will help to prevent misstatements. It's of purchases and payables. Give an example if you like. If a supplier sends 2 invoices for the same goods. Again, you could inspect But a great one for this, I just wanted to introduce it, is reperform. Not very popular with the client, but you say, well, you've done it, I can do it better. So you actually reperform and see if you come out with the same result. That's a test of control as well. Reperform sample of supplier statement reconciliations. Reperform is good for bank recs, supplier statement recs. They're the main areas where I think you can use them to confirm that client staff have prepared accurately. Now, the last one I wanted to mention, because it's a different type of test of control, is if I come back up here, something in the payroll department. Let's look at the second paragraph. HR give each staff member a number, new staff member a number. And then the basic point is that unless you put that unique number into the system, then you can't actually get that employee on the payroll. So let's play around with that. It doesn't matter that we're drifting back to payroll. Just be clear. Just say, look, new employees. Are only added to the system with a, what do they call it? We said before, a unique employee number. So clearly that would stop fictitious employees being entered onto the system if the payroll clerk wanted to put her 7 sisters on the system. So this would prevent fictitious staff, much better word I think than bogus, if you can spell it, being added to the system. Now, test of control, inspect, observe, reperform. One other that you can use, of course, is you can use the IT, and that's that you test the system by putting your own data in. Remember, that's called test data. So use test data. What we would actually do is attempt to enter a fictitious employee into the system and confirm. I'll call it a fictitious reference number, I think. Again, that it's rejected by the system. There we are. Don't forget, you have to be careful with controls questions. This one was asking for positive things. Key controls, which after September will be called direct controls. So don't start talking about weaknesses in controls or we'll get nothing. Say to someone you love that the words that attach to control tests are inspect, observe, reperform, and if you're a bit of a prize winner, test data as well. Thank you for taking the time to listen.